Hello everyone, and welcome back to Aliens After Dark. Every night on this channel, I share alien and UFO encounter stories, told softly, to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we begin, I'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're listening from tonight. Now, get comfortable. Let your eyes close if they want to, and let's begin. The far shore of the Narrows had someone on it every time the fire got bigger. Only then. That's the part I've never been able to put down, and I've had almost 50 years to put it down. My name's Colleen. In September of 1978, I was 31 years old, and I kept books for a heating oil company in Duluth, Minnesota. My husband Dale and I paddled the canoe country up along the border most summers. That year, we went late, the third week of September, when the outfitters are half closed and the lakes are mostly yours. We were 3 days into a 5-day loop, 2 portages and maybe 11 miles from the entry point, which up there might as well be 1100 once the sun's down. I should tell you what kind of person I am because I think it matters. I keep books for a living. Kept them for 39 years, all told. I write down miles, weather, matches used. I have a trip ledger going back to 1963, a little canvas-covered thing with a stub pencil tied on with string, and if the ledger says we made 9 miles, we made 9 miles. I don't round up. I know what a moose sounds like coming through alder, which is like a freight with antlers, and I know what a bear sounds like, which is mostly like nothing until it wants you to hear it. I wasn't a nervous woman in the woods. I'm still not, I suppose, though I've made 1 or 2 adjustments. The campsite that night was a bare granite point over a narrows. 80 yards of water, maybe less, over to the far shore, which was birch and black spruce standing on more granite. Pretty spot. The kind you paddle a little farther to get. We'd hung the food, turned the canoe over with the paddles under it, and eaten early. There was a cold snap coming down from Ontario, and you could feel it getting ready, the way the air goes thin and the smoke stands up straight. Dale was asleep by 9:30. That man could sleep on a portage trail with the pack still on. I sat up with the fire, the way I usually did, with the cocoa pot down in the coals, and the loons going out on the big water behind us. The lake in the Narrows had gone flat. Poured metal. You get maybe a dozen nights like that in a life where the water is so still, it seems like a solid you could walk on if you had the nerve. Now, my father taught me fires, and my father had rules. 1 stick at a time, split cedar if you have it. You lay the next stick on when the flames come down to about knee height, and not before. He used to say you could read the hour off a woodpile that way, and you can. 16 sticks is an evening. I'd split my 16 before supper, and I was maybe 5 sticks in, sitting on the granite with my back against the bear barrel, warm on one side, September on the other. I remember the ordinary parts of that hour better than I remember some whole years. The granite still holding the day's heat under me, faint, like a stove 2 rooms away. The cocoa getting a skin on it in the pot, and me lifting the skin off with a twig the way my mother would have scolded me for. The lake smell, which up there at night is a clean, cold smell, like a whetstone. Sparks going up off the cedar and dying out at about treetop height, every one of them, as if there were a ceiling. I was as content as I ever get. I want that in the record, too. Whatever else the night was, it started as one of the good ones. I laid the 6th stick on and the fire came up, the way a fire does when it gets fresh cedar. The light walked out. That's how I've always thought of it. When a fire flares, the light walks out from it in every direction, and out across that flat water it walked a long way. The far shore came up out of the dark all at once. Birch trunks take firelight like fence posts, pale and straight, a whole row of them over there catching it. And between two of the birches, low against the rock, there was something standing that wasn't a post. I want to be careful here, because it was the first time, and I only had it a second. Upright. Narrow, about where the light quit, right at the edge of what the flare could reach, so it was more a difference than a thing. The way a column of dark can be a difference. Then the flame settled, the light walked back in across the water, and the far shore closed up and went back to being a black wall under stars. I sat there and thought about it, the way you'd think about a column in a ledger that doesn't foot. Probably a stump, I thought. Probably a shadow off the birches doing something geometrical. There are 100 honest explanations on a lake shore, and I could name most of them. I drank some cocoa. The loons kept on. A beaver slapped once, way off, and that's an ordinary sound, and I remember being glad of it. 10 minutes, maybe 12, and the flames came down to knee height. I laid on the 7th stick. Cedar again, and it took hard, a bigger flare than the last one, and the light walked out farther. The far shore came up again, more of it this time, the lit ground running higher up the rock and deeper into the trees. It was there again. And here's the thing I need you to hear, because it's the whole night in one sentence. It was not in the same place. The place it had been standing was inside the light now, plain lit granite, nothing on it. It was farther back. It was standing exactly at the new edge, where this bigger light quit, the same way it had stood exactly at the old edge where the smaller light quit. I hadn't seen it move. There'd been dark in between, sure, but I was watching that shore the whole while, or near the whole while, and I never saw anything cross the lit ground, and lit ground was most of it now. I did what I suppose anybody does. I made it a moose. A moose works a shoreline at night, browsing the waterline, and firelight over water does strange arithmetic, and a tired woman at 10 o'clock is not a surveyor. I actually laughed at myself a little, quiet, so as not to wake Dale. I poured out the last of the cocoa and I let the fire do what it wanted for a while. And what it wanted, without new wood, was to come down. It came down to coals. The far shore went out like a lamp, and I sat in the little red circle of a coal fire, and I couldn't see 80 yards and I couldn't see 8. Just the loons, and the water not moving, and my own heart, which I could hear by then. And I remember thinking, that was silly. It seemed silly. A moose, I thought. Go to bed, Colleen. Instead, I laid on the 8th stick. I watched it take, and I watched the light walk out across the water like a tide coming in fast, and I watched the far shore come up, near rock first, then the birches, then the higher rock behind them, the reach going out and out as the flame climbed. And the whole way out, at every foot of that walk, the thing was at the edge of it, not standing still while the light found it. At the edge, the moving edge, the way a mark on the rim of a wheel stays on the rim while the wheel turns. When the light stopped walking, it stopped. When the flame leaned over in the little breath of wind and the whole lit reach leaned with it leaned too, stayed on the line. Nothing crossed the middle ground. That's the part I'd swear to in front of anybody. The middle of that shore was lit up plain, 40 yards of bare granite you couldn't have walked a cat across without me seeing it. It was never in the middle ground. It was only ever at the edge, as if the edge of light is a place, as if the edge is a place you can stand on, the way I was standing on granite. I stopped drinking the cocoa because the cup was clicking against my teeth. But I want to be honest about what I felt because it wasn't what you'd think. It wasn't a scream sitting in my chest. It was more like the feeling when a column has been footing wrong all afternoon and you finally see the transposed figure. Something in the night had been running on a rule I didn't know, And now I knew the rule, and knowing it was worse. The rule was, it stands where the light quits. The rule was, however much light I make, it will be exactly at the end of it. Birch bark shows pale a long way off, even at night. 100 feet, easy, on starlight alone. So, I could half see that shore the whole time, is what I'm saying. A row of pale suggestions where the trunks stood. What I could not see was between them, and it was between them that the something stood, wherever the light's edge happened to lie. I tried counting trunks to fix its place, the way you'd tick a column. 7 trunks from the leaning one, I told myself. And at the next flare it was 9 trunks from the leaning one, and the light's edge was at 9, and I gave up counting. The fire burned steady for a while, and the boundary of the light lay across the far rock in a clean line. You could see the line. Firelight is soft, people think, but over flat water on a still night it lays down an edge you could chalk. And along that edge, in one place, the line was dented, pushed in. A shallow bay in the light, about the width of a set of shoulders, where the light should have reached and didn't. When the flames moved, the whole line breathed, and the dent breathed with it, and stayed a dent. The loons never stopped. I keep coming back to that, all these years. Loons will tell you about a wolf on the shore. They'll tell you about a boat. They talked all night the way they talked to each other about nothing, and whatever stood across the narrows keeping the edge of my firelight was, so far as the loons were concerned, not there at all. Dale slept. His snoring changed pitch when I unzipped the tent flap to look in at him. I remember that. And I zipped it back and stayed by the fire because it seemed to me that somebody ought to be minding the light. I was down to the last 3 sticks around midnight. And I did a thing then that I've thought about many times since, because I still don't fully know why I did it. My father's rule was 1 stick. I took all 3, and I laid them on together crosswise, the way you'd build up a fire for company, and I stood back from the heat of it. The flare went up higher than my head. The light didn't walk out this time. It jumped. The reach went 20 feet farther up the far shore in one breath, the birches going bright like a row of struck matches, the granite behind them coming up pale, and a lane of light laid down the water between us like a floor. Nothing was caught in it. You understand what I'm telling you. 20 new feet of lit ground, arriving all at once, too fast for anything alive to clear it. And nothing was caught mid-stride because it was already at the new edge when the new edge existed. The light got there, and it was there. Like the light was arriving at an appointment. Like the edge had been agreed on beforehand, and only one of us hadn't been told. I had the 4th stick in my hand. There wasn't a 4th stick, I mean the first of the next night's wood, a piece of jack pine I'd set aside. I stood there holding it, and the fire roaring soft the way cedar does, and I understood, in the way you understand things at midnight that take years to say, that I was being allowed to choose the size of the circle. That was all my wood was doing. It wasn't protection, it was drawing. I could make the circle any size I wanted, and the answer would always be the same, and the answer was, this much is yours. The line is wherever you put it, and I will be at the line. I didn't put the stick on, I said, out loud but quiet, all right. Just that. I don't know who I thought I was saying it to. Then I banked the fire, which took a while, and I did it right, because your hands want something to do right at a time like that. My father called it putting the fire to bed, raking the coals into a ring of stones, and I put the fire to bed and the far shore went out, and I got into the tent next to Dale and lay listening. The water never moved. No splash, no stones turning, nothing swimming. Whatever had kept the far side of my light did not cross the water in the dark, or if it did it the way it did everything else, without a between. I must have slept, because the tent was gray when I opened my eyes. Dale was up making coffee, cheerful as a jay, no idea, and I paddled us over to the far shore before breakfast, on the excuse of loosening my shoulders, and I walked that granite in the flat morning light. Dew silvers everything up there on a cold September morning. The rock over there was silver all over, wet to the touch, beaded up on the moss and the birch roots. Silver right down to the water line, all except one line. A dry line, about a hand wide, running along the rock maybe 30 feet, curving a little the way the reach of my light had curved. Dry the way the underside of a canoe is dry. I put my palm flat on it. Then I put my palm on the wet rock beside it. I did that more than once, I think. The dry line ran exactly where the farthest light had stood at the biggest flare, along the boundary, not inside it. Not one dry patch where a thing might have bedded down. A line. The edge itself, printed on the rock, the way a hot pan prints a counter. I paddled back and ate my oatmeal. In the ledger that morning I wrote the date, and the weather, fair and colder in the miles we planned. Then I sat with the pencil a while. What was I going to put down? I keep honest books. At the bottom of the page I wrote, "Burned more than we should have." And that was every word I could get to go through the pencil. And it is still, of everything I've ever written, the truest line in that ledger. We finished the loop. Nothing else happened, unless you count me sitting up the fourth night feeding a fire one stick at a time until dawn with a level head, and no good reason I'd have admitted to. I still go up there. I'm 80 now, almost. I go with my grandchildren, and they're kind about the pace of my portaging. At night, I feed the fire one stick at a time, always, and when they tease me about it, I tell them it's economy, that a depression baby doesn't burn her whole wood pile for show. That's not it. You know that's not it. A small fire has a close edge, and a close edge is honest, and what's honest you can live beside. It was probably a moose, and light on water, and a dry streak in the rock where a seam sheds the dew, and a tired bookkeeper adding it up wrong. I've had 50 years to believe that, and most days I just about manage it. But then again, I never once, in 11 flares of that fire, saw anything arrive, and I never saw anything leave, and things that are real do their traveling in the middle ground, where the rest of us live. Maybe I read the dark wrong, but then again, maybe not. Whatever walked beside me that night stayed exactly one pace outside my light for 4 hours, and I never saw so much as a sleeve. My name's Toby. In October of 1994, I was 24, a line cook between jobs, and I was hiking the long trail in Vermont, end to end, southbound, alone. Late season. The leaves were down, which matters more than anything else in this story. So, let me say it plain. In a hardwood forest in late October, the ground is paper. Every living thing that moves on it signs its name. A squirrel is a fast little scribble. A deer is 4 points coming down neat, like someone setting down china. A grouse is a panic. An acorn is a single tap. 200 and some miles of that trail were behind me by then, and I'd learned the sorting the way you learn a kitchen sounds, without trying. Leaves don't lie. Everything walks in leaves at its own weight. I got caught out that evening because of water. The spring I'd counted on was a trickle, and I stood there like a fool for 45 minutes filtering enough to cook with, and the light went while I did it. 3 miles to the next shelter. No moon till almost morning. Both shelters on that stretch were empty that week, and the last person I'd seen was 2 days back, heading the other way. So it was night hiking, which I didn't love and didn't fear. You put your head down, you follow the blazes, you make your little room of light and you carry it. About my light. I ran a headlamp on 2 AA batteries and I had a ritual, because a cook likes a ritual. spares rode in my inside chest pocket against the warm, because cold kills a battery faster than use does. And you can read a battery's life in the beam's color. Fresh, the light is white, a hard, clean white. As it dies, it goes to butter. You get so you can taste the hour off the color, the way you can taste when a stock's gone past. I was proud of all that. I mention it because my pride is load-bearing later. Night hiking has its own small facts, and I had time to learn them all again that evening. The white paint blazes, which jump off the trees at noon, go gray and shy at night, so you find them by shape more than shine. My food bag knocked my spine at every downhill step, a dull little fist, and the last inch of water in my bottle rattled like a can with a nail in it, and I counted switchbacks to keep some arithmetic between me and the dark. 4 down to the brook, 2 up the other side. My boots cracked the skin of the first frozen puddle of the fall, and I remember being pleased about that, the way you're pleased by the first of anything. It was a good night is what I mean, cold, clear mine. For 20 minutes it was mine. The steps started maybe 20 minutes in. Off my left shoulder downslope, out where the beam gave up. Steps in the leaves, at my pace. I stopped, they stopped, about a half-beat late, the way your own noise stops when you stop, and that's what I told myself it was. Sound off my own boots, doing something acoustic. I started, they started. I did the cook's trick of changing rhythm, quick, quick, slow, like walking a rack of sauté pans through a rush. It didn't copy my rhythm and nothing about it came back off stone. It just kept walking even, unhurried, a man's weight, at a man's stride, exactly at the edge of the light. Not one leaf's worth of it inside the lit ground. I know because I looked. The beam at full was maybe 50 feet of usable seeing, and at 51 feet something was signing its name in the leaves over and over, and the leaves were telling me its weight, and the weight was mine. I sorted it honestly. I want credit for that. 2 even for deer. Deer stop and start, they browse, they blow at you. Too heavy for fox, way too heavy for coon. Not a grouse, nothing like a bear, and a moose in leaves sounds like a building coming. It was 2 feet at a man's weight, keeping a man's interval. There's one animal that walks like that, and supposedly I was the only one of those for 6 miles. Here's where the stone wall comes in. There are old farm walls all through those woods, running along the benches, and my map showed one paralleling the trail on the downhill side. Sound bounces off a wall. I built the whole case while I walked. My own footsteps slapping off that wall, coming back a half-beat late, throwing from the left. That's real, that happens. I even tested it. I stomped once hard and heard the slap come back off the stone, and I actually laughed out there in the dark and got a frozen candy bar out of my hip pocket and ate it walking. And for 20 minutes I was a man who had solved something, chewing caramel that pulled at his molars, making time. Then the wall ended. There's a gap where a woods road cuts through, and after the gap the wall bears away downhill, gone. The steps didn't bear away. The steps stayed at 51 feet, off my left shoulder in step. My mouth was still sweet from the candy bar. That's the detail I'd take out of the memory if I could. The sweet and the steps, both at once. I thought about the shelter's plank walls, and about the little laminated card on the shelter board I'd read 2 nights before. The one about the farm families who'd cleared these benches and stacked these walls 160 years ago, and how the woods had taken it all back so completely that their fields were now my wilderness. I thought about them walking these benches at night with lanterns. Whatever kept my edge that night, I found myself wondering, without wanting to, whether it had kept the edge of lantern light too, and candle light, and whatever light there was before that. The interval felt that practiced. It felt like a thing that had been done to this hillside before, and done well, and I was only the latest room of light to come through with something at its rim. I did the math I didn't want to do, and I kept walking, because the math also said the shelter was ahead and nothing about the steps was gaining, and the beam was going to butter. I'd been running it since dusk, and the white had gone off it, and my little room of light was pulling its walls in, a foot at a time. Over the next hour, maybe more, the room shrank, and I watched the edge come toward me, and the steps came with it, always at the edge. I need to be exact here because this is the whole thing. They were not coming toward me. They were keeping the edge, and the edge was coming toward me, because my battery was dying. When the room was 50 feet, they walked at 51. When it was 40, they walked at 41. My light was being spent like money, and something out there was counting my change. At some point, I stopped and swapped batteries. Middle of the trail, pack still on because you don't sit down. Everybody knows you don't sit down. My hands did the ritual, and my hands were shaking, and I dropped the dead pair in the leaves, which shamed me. A hiker doesn't drop anything, and I did not bend down for them. I got the fresh pair in and thumbed the switch, and the room jumped back out to white. 50 good feet, edges hard. The steps were at 51. Instantly. And here is what I heard in between. In the 4 or 5 seconds of full dark while my thumb found the switch, nothing. Leaves don't lie, and no leaves said anything moved. Whatever had been walking at 41 feet was at 51 when the light came back. And the ground between those two distances is 10 feet of dry paper, and it had crossed that paper without a word. The light came back on and found it already correct. Like the room and everything at the room's edge were being drawn together, in one stroke, each time. I'll tell you the strangest part of my own behavior. I got calmer after that, some switch flips. The cook brain takes the ticket. I walked, I breathed, I kept my beam on the blazes, and about a mile short of the shelter I stopped in the middle of the trail, and I turned my light off. On purpose. I could not tell you why, except that I'd stopped believing the light was for seeing, and I wanted to know what it was for. I counted 10 out loud. My own voice saying numbers into a woods with no light in it anywhere, and the woods were still, not held breath still, just still, ordinary, enormous, a hillside of bare trees ticking with frost, an owl somewhere doing its low work. No steps, no settling of leaves where a weight might be standing on them. For 10 numbers, there was nothing in the world at all off my left shoulder. I turned the light on. The room came back, my breath smoking through the beam, and the steps started again. First step, second step, even, unhurried, at the new edge, at 51 feet, as though the count of 10 had been a thing we did. As though everyone present had observed a silence, out of respect for something, and now it was over, and we could all walk on. The last mile went by. I don't remember it well, except that the steps thinned out somewhere in it. Not stopped. Thinned the way rain thins, until the leaves off my left shoulder were saying less and less at their edge, and then were saying nothing. And I came to the shelter, and it was a plank platform and a roof and 3 walls, and I have never loved architecture more. I wrote in the logbook, "You're supposed to write something." I wrote, "Long night," and my trail name, and I lay in my bag with my headlamp in my fist like a rosary until the sky went gray. In the morning, I went back. Daylight makes you brave, and it makes you owe things, and I owed the trail my dead batteries. It took a while to find the spot. What I found first were the arcs. At the 3 places I'd stopped that night, and I could place them: the water stop, the swap, the count of 10, the leaf litter was turned. Turned, like a spoon had gone through it, in a shallow arc. Each arc curved around where I'd stood, all at about the same sweep, and I walked the distance from my boot prints to the near edge of each arc. and I know what the distances were. At the water stop, where my lamp had been fresh, it was long. At the swap spot, where the beam had died to butter, it was short. Each arc stood off from where I'd stood at just about the throw my light had owned at that place, at that hour. The edge of my room, traced in turned leaves. 3 fittings, taken while I stood still, of a suit I hope nobody's making. And the batteries. My dropped pair, the dead ones, that I'd been ashamed of. They were on a stone beside the trail, side by side, parallel, ends even. Placed. I use that word and my brother-in-law says, landed, they bounced and landed, and fine. I allow landed. I picked them up because you pack out what you bring in, and their being tidy was somehow the worst thing I ever felt with 2 fingers, and I hiked out to the road that afternoon and ate 2 dinners in town and called my mother about nothing for an hour. I cook in a ski town now. I hike more than ever, and I'm good at it, and I'm not a frightened man. But I carry 2 spare sets of batteries and I swap them early in the afternoon, sitting down, with the light still tall. And I have never night hiked that stretch again, not once, though I've had chances. Probably it was sound off stone and a tired mind, and squirrels doing something ambitious with the leaf litter and batteries that bounced tidy. Probably. Leaves don't lie is the thing. I keep coming back to that. Leaves don't lie, and for 4 hours, at the edge of my own light, they kept telling me the truth. And the truth weighed just about what I do. All that summer, something stood exactly where my lantern quit. And I mean exactly. To the pace. My name's Iva. In July of 1967, I was 58 years old, newly widowed that spring, and I'd taken the campground host job at a state park on the Oregon coast because my daughter thought I needed somewhere to be, and she was right, though not in the way she thought. The host gets a site by the entrance, a canvas awning, a registration table, and a cash box that was an old cigar box with a tray in it. Campers came in, dusty and left damp, because on that coast the fog comes in most nights after 10, off the water, through the spruce, and beads up on everything you own. There was a foghorn a long way off that sounded all night at its own interval. You stop counting it after a week. It becomes the shape of the dark. I'll tell you who I am so you can weigh me right. I raised 4 children on a fishing dock's wages, and I buried a good man in April without falling down at it. I'm not a flincher. My first week, I paced off the throw of my lantern because I wanted a clothesline where towels would still be findable after supper. 22 paces from the table to where the light quit at the tree line. I drove my clothesline stake at 20. I tell you that so you'll understand. The edge of my light was not a guess to me. It was a measured thing. I'd walked it with my own legs and written it on my own memory, 22 paces, and I knew where it lay the way you know where your own fence is. The lantern was a Coleman, white gas, my husband's. There's a ritual to them, and I loved it, honestly, that first summer alone. 30 strokes on the pump with your thumb over the hole. The silk mantle, tied on, careful, burned into ash that holds the shape. Then the hiss. You can read a Coleman's hiss like a gauge, when it's fat, when it's starving, when the mantle's going. Mine sat on the registration table every night from dusk until I turned in, and it threw a good clean circle, table to tree line, 22 paces. The work suited me better than I could have guessed. Days were all people. Campers' kids sold me huckleberries in a paper cup for a nickel, and I bought every cup. There was a tide book under the cash tray with its corners gone soft, and I got so I could tell a family what the low tide would give them tomorrow like I'd lived there 30 years. And nights were all ritual. Wind my husband's watch, which ran fast and which I corrected every noon and never once considered retiring. Move my chair the 8 inches that kept me out from under the awning seam. because canvas gathers the fog into one cold line and lets it go down your collar. Watch the moths come to the lantern, and the bats come for the moths. Quick brown stitches through the top of the light. I was a woman with a lamp at the edge of a dark continent, and I found I didn't mind it. That's the frame you should see the rest of this in. I wasn't afraid of that tree line. I did my crying at 2 in the afternoon, on schedule, like a sensible person, and my nights were the calmest part of me. The figure came the second week. It stood at the tree line, in the salal, at the exact place the light quit. I took it for a camper first, that's the honest truth. Some man come up quiet to ask about firewood, and I said, "Evening," and got nothing, and looked properly, and then I understood that it was standing wrong for a camper. Campers wander into the light. They apologize with their shoulders. They show you their hands. Here I am, just a person. This stood where the light stopped the way water stands at a tide line. Not 1 inch in, not 1 inch out. As though the edge of my lantern's reach were a curb, and it had walked up to the curb and was minding it. I sat still and watched it a long time. It didn't sway, didn't shift its weight the way a person can't help doing. The foghorn went and went. At some point I looked down at the registration box because a moth had got into it, just a second, and when I looked up the tree line was only salal. I wrote nothing in the park's little day journal. What was there to write? A man stood at the dark and then didn't. It came on the clear nights. That's the first thing I learned about it. On the nights the fog came in early and thick, when the lantern's light turned to a soft ball of glow with no proper edge to it at all. Nothing stood anywhere. I'd sit under the dripping awning with my sweater smelling of wood smoke and mildew, and the tree line stayed empty, and I worked out over the weeks what the difference was. Fog makes the boundary soft. On fog nights, my light didn't quit anywhere in particular. It just faded gradual, no line, and whatever it was, it did not come on the nights there was no line. It required a line to stand on. I know how that sounds. I knew how it sounded in 1967, which is why I said it to nobody. The mantle taught me the second thing. A mantle tore in the first week of August, and I tied on a fresh one and burned it in, and a fresh mantle throws brighter. Anyone who's run a Coleman knows. The lantern came up whiter than it had been all summer, and that same minute, and I do mean the same minute, the figure was farther back, deeper into the salal, dimmer, at the new quit line of the new brighter light. In the daylight I paced it, 3 paces brighter, near as I could figure from where the browning later showed. 3 paces back. And the sagging mantle taught me the third thing, the one I've never told anybody without watching their face go careful. Some nights an old mantle will sag mid-burn, and the light drops by a third between one breath and the next. When that happened, the figure was nearer. Between blinks. No stride taken, no salal moving, no sound, and salal is a noisy plant, it's a gossip, you can't touch it without it telling. One blink of light, and the boundary fell 3 paces inward, and the figure stood on the new boundary, already, the way a reflection is nearer when you tilt the mirror. That was when I understood it was not walking anywhere, ever. It was keeping. Whatever the line did, it did. The line was the thing it was faithful to, not me. I was just the woman who owned the line. The raccoon is worth a sentence. We had one, a big, civic-minded fellow who worked my trash cans every night of the season. He worked them straight through all of this. 10 feet inside the light, prosperous, rattling the lids, while that stood at the tree line beyond him. He never once looked at it. Animals are supposed to know, people say. Well, the raccoon either knew better than I did, or knew nothing, and I've never decided which of those helps me more. I told the ranger a careful half of it. Mr. Quillen, a decent man, gone by 6 every evening in his green truck, which was part of why my nights were my own to explain. I said something stands at my light's edge some evenings. He said elk. He said elk stand at light edges all the time. Cows especially. They're curious and they're shy, and the edge is where both of those win. And he wasn't wrong. That's true about elk, and I wanted it, so I took it. For a week I had an elk. I even set carrot ends out by the tree line, the way you would for a horse, on a flat stone. They sat there going leathery for a week. But the believing held anyway, more or less, because an elk is a thing a widow can share a summer with, and I was in the market. What ended the elk was the night I carried the lantern out. I don't know what got into me. August, clear, the horn going, campers all down, and it standing at the quit line, and I had been alone with it for 6 weeks by then, and something in me stood up out of the chair and picked the lantern up by the bail. I walked toward the tree line. 10 paces, I counted them. I will always count things now. And it went back 10. Not hurried, not startled. It receded the way the end of your shadow recedes when you walk toward a wall, which is to say, geometrically, without any walking in it. And I stopped, and it stopped, and I stood there in the middle of my own lit circle holding a hissing lantern out at arm's length like a fool offering a lamp to the forest. And I understood the thing I'd half known since the mantle. The interval it kept was not to me. I could not close the distance because I was not one of the 2 points the distance ran between. The light was. I could have walked to the ocean holding that lantern and never gained a foot on it. I said, "All right." Out loud, just that, the way you'd close a ledger. And I turned around and walked my 10 paces back and set the lantern on the table and sat down and made myself pour coffee from the thermos with a steady hand, and did pour it steady, and I'm as proud of that pour as of nearly anything in my life. It was never any nearer than the line all summer. I want to say that plainly because it's the fairest thing I can say about it. It had the manners of a tide. It came exactly to the mark, and it never once came past the mark, and there are people I've hosted at that campground I can't say as much for. The browning showed in late August. The salal at the tree line went brown at the tips, a hand's depth into the leaves, in a shallow arc. I found it hanging towels. The arc ran along my 22 paces, curve for curve, the whole reach of the old mantle's light, not the new ones. Not burned, browned, the way the far side of a window plant browns, quiet, like the leaves had spent a season somewhere with different weather. And my clothesline stake, driven at 20 paces inside the line. 3 mornings that month I found it leaned. A degree, 2 degrees, out, away from my sight, toward the trees, like something had tested which way it would go. I straightened it twice. The 3rd time I looked at it a while, and I left it how it wanted, and it never leaned further, and I choose to think we settled something between us by that. I hosted 4 more summers, and it never came back after that first one, or if it did, it came on fog nights when there was no line for me to catch it keeping. I live in town now, near my daughter. There's a lantern on my porch, my husband's same Coleman, and I light it some soft evenings and I keep it turned low, and my grandchildren think that's thrift. A low light reaches far enough. That's what I tell them. What I don't tell them is that a low light keeps its edge close to the porch, where I can see the whole of what the edge does. It was probably elk and mantle light doing arithmetic on an old woman's grief, and salt browning the salal, and frost heaving a steak. Probably, but it stood at a measured line for a measured summer, to the pace, and grief doesn't pace things off. I do, I paced it. Maybe I just wanted company at the edge of the dark that year, but then again, maybe the company was already there, and all I ever did was decide how close. The night I'm going to tell you about, the moon went down the way it always does, and something crossed our meadow inside its shadow, keeping step with it for the better part of 2 hours. My name's Grady. I'm a cook. In October of 1986, I was 45, and I was cooking for an elk camp in the Wyoming high country, the way I did every fall. I want to be clear about one thing up front. I'm no hunter. My rifle stayed cased in the truck at the trailhead, 9 miles of two-track away, and nothing in this story gets shot at or chased or even spoken to. The hunters rode out before first light and came back at dark and slept like felled trees, and the story happens in the hours that belong to nobody but me. A camp cook lives at both ends of the night. It's the middle of the day I sleep through. The camp was a wall tent at the edge of a long meadow, under a ridge that ran along our west side. Sheet metal stove, sourdough crock, 4 horses on a picket line at the meadow's south end. Hard frost every night that week. You'd hear the stovepipe tick itself cool after supper, and the horses working their feet all night. A sound like slow gravel, and the creek at the meadow's north edge talking under a lace of shore ice. I can hear all of it right now, telling you. A camp like that is mostly sounds, once the lamp's out. We ran no lantern past supper. Mantles were dear, and my hands know that kitchen in the dark. Here's the part you need for the rest to matter. A cook in the mountains learns to tell time by the ridge. When the moon goes down behind a west ridge, the ridge throws its shadow out across the ground toward you, and the shadow walks. It isn't sudden. It's a line, a moving line, moonlight on one side and dark on the other, and it comes across a meadow at a pace you can time. I'd cooked under that ridge enough falls to know the pace by heart. Shadow line hits the creek. I light the stove. Shadow line reaches the picket horses. First hunter's feet hit the floor. Creek to picket line. 40 minutes, near enough, and my bread never once cared whether my watch had died in a cold shirt pocket, which is a thing watches did up there. The moon was my backup clock, and the ridge was its hand, and I trusted the two of them the way you trust arithmetic. I should tell you about the first night because nothing happened on it, and the nothing matters. First night I was up at moonset same as always, and the shadow line walked the meadow same as always. Creek at 2:10, picket line at 2:10, and I stood at the flap with my coffee and watched it the way another man watches television. It's a beautiful thing if you've never seen it. The frost catches the moon so hard the ground looks lit from inside, and then the dark comes across it slow, and the meadow goes out like somebody's drawing a cloth over silver. I've watched it 300 nights of my life, maybe more. I'm telling you, I know that meadow's night arithmetic to the minute and the foot, and on the first night every figure added. Remember that. The man who saw what I saw on the second night was not a man guessing at what the shadow usually does. Second night of the hunt, I was up at moonset doing my sponge. The sponge sighs when it's working, a little sound like a sleeper turning over, and my dough board shows a flower ghost of every knothole in it, and the tent smelled of canvas and pitch and yesterday's bacon, and my own breath had frosted the inside of the canvas over my cot in a patch shaped like weather. Gibbous moon, big and low and yellow going down, the whole meadow lit silver with frost, bright enough to read a label by. I stepped out of the tent to fill the coffee pot at the creek, and I stopped where the canvas ends because something at the far end of the meadow was wrong in a way my eye caught before my head did. The ridge shadow had already taken the top third of the meadow. You could see the line of it, plain, dark grass on one side, frost-bright grass on the other, straight as a snapped chalk string and walking east at its steady pace. And at the line, in the dark, just behind it, there was a slot. That's the only word I've ever found. A place where the frost-bright grass ended one step early. Man wide. Man tall. If a man were lying down in the dark and standing up in it at the same time. And I know that doesn't make sense, and that's as close as I can get. The bright grass ran along the shadow's edge for 200 yards, even in silver, and in one spot, about as wide as shoulders, the bright stopped a step short, like a bite out of the line. A cook stands still very well. It's most of the job. I stood with the coffee pot and I watched that slot for 10 full minutes, and here's what it did. It kept station. The shadow line walked east, the way it always walks, at the pace I bake by. And the slot walked with it, exactly with it. Not wandering the way an animal grazes, drifting, pausing, coming back. It moved the way a man walks a fence he owns, along a line at the line's pace, one step inside the dark the whole way. The moon went down a hand's width, and the shadow ate another stretch of meadow, and the slot rode the new edge like it was rails. My first thought was elk, and I want to defend that thought, because it's a good one. A bull elk will drift a shadow line to stay hidden. Every camp cook and every guide knows it. They're geniuses about light for such enormous animals. For a good stretch, I stood there half pleased, composing the story I'd tell at breakfast. Big Bull walked your meadow at 3 a.m, boys, kept the shadow the whole way, and you snored through him. I had the coffee poured in my head already. That's the trouble with a comfortable explanation. It cooks itself. The horses ended it. I noticed them because their sound changed, that slow gravel of them working feed. It stopped, all 4 at once, and I looked down the meadow and every one of them had her head up and turned, toward the slot, and then they tracked it. All 4 heads, together, turning slow as a clock's minute hand, following that piece of dark down the meadow as it came. No snort, no pulling at the line, no stamping. None of the fuss horses make over a strange elk or a lion's wind or a man they don't know. They watched it the way they'd watch weather, and they turned with it, synchronized, like they had a category for it that I didn't have, and inside that category everything was fine. Elk don't get watched like that, and an elk, at some point in a 200-yard walk, is an elk. It puts its head down, it pulls grass, it turns an ear, it drops a shoulder into its stride, it does one living thing. The slot did no living thing. It kept the line at the line's pace with the evenness of the line itself, and somewhere in my chest the breakfast story about the big bull quietly took its apron off and went home. I set the coffee pot down on the wood pile, and I stood by my tent flap, and I confess the thought I had was the plainest one a man can have. I thought, it's going to pass the tent. And behind that thought, the cook's thought, the one that shames me a little, and that I've decided to keep in the story because it's true. I thought 40 minutes creek to picket line. It'll be by the tent at about 20 past. I knew its schedule. I'd known its schedule for 30 years. That was the coldest part of the whole night. Colder than anything the frost did. I had been keeping that thing's time since before it ever showed itself to me. Or it had been keeping mine, and there was no way anymore to tell which. It passed the tent. The shadow line came on at its bread and coffee pace, 40 minutes creek to picket line, the same pace it kept every night of my working life, and the slot came with it. One step inside the dark, and it passed 60 feet out from where I stood. I'll tell you everything I know about it from 60 feet, and it isn't much, and every word of it is a thing that wasn't there. No breath. The air was cold enough that my own breath hung around my head like wool, and above that slot the air stayed clear the whole way down the meadow. No sound in the grass. Frost, stiff grass tells on everything, and it told nothing. No face, because no light ever touched where a face would be. It was a place where the moonlight ended a step early, walking past my camp at the moon's own speed. That's all it ever was, the whole night. An absence, keeping an appointment I could have timed a loaf by. And as it went by, the picket line went silent. The chewing stopped when the slot drew level with the horses and started again when it had passed, like a wave going down a church pew, and the length of the silence was exactly the length of the passing. Nothing else in the night so much as stirred. A coyote string started up way off south, ordinary as male, and quit, and the creek kept talking, and the slot reached the east trees at the meadow's end just as the last moonlight went off the grass, and then the whole meadow was shadow, and there was nothing left to be missing from it. I lit my stove early. I sat by it until the sponge was ready, and I made cinnamon rolls that morning, which weren't on my plan because my hands wanted the extra steps, and the hunters praised me for them and rode out, and I said not one word. Cooks don't spook a paying camp, but when the light came up full, I walked the meadow, creek to picket line, and I found what the frost had kept for me. One lane, man wide, running the length of the meadow, along where the shadow's edge had traveled. The grass in it was bent, every blade, all one way, east, the direction the shadow walks. Not broken, not scuffed, no dirt showing, nothing a hoof or a boot leaves. Bent, smooth, like the whole lane had been stroked once by something the size of the night. And the frost lay over the bend. You understand what I'm telling you. The frost had finished forming on top of grass that was already bent. Whatever bent that lane, bent it during the shadow's walk, at the shadow's pace, and the cold came along after and set it, like icing a thing that's done. The horses faced east at moonset the rest of that week. All four, every night together, chewing calm as deacons, heads turned to where the shadow line would start its walk. Then the hunt ended, and we packed out. And I've been back to that meadow 11 falls since and never seen the slot again, and the horses I knew are gone to grass, and I still cook 2 camps every October. I still set my watch by moonset. Force of habit, my hunters say, and let them. Elk walk shadow lines, and frost does strange work, and a tired cook at 3 a.m. is nobody's surveyor. I'd have sworn it was an elk that first 10 minutes, and part of me would still like to. But I've timed bread by that ridge for 30 years, and I'll tell you what I know that most don't. Elk don't keep step with the moon. Nothing living does. The moon doesn't ask, and the moon doesn't wait, and nothing owes the moon that kind of manners. Whatever walked our meadow that night owed them and paid them the whole way down. Maybe there's a plain answer. But then again, I cook at both ends of the night, and I've never once found it on the menu. For 5 nights, something stood on a circle only my camera could see, and it stood on it to the meter. My name's Tessa. In May of 2005, I was 27, a contract wildlife photographer, and I was 5 nights alone at a backcountry site in the Great Smoky Mountains, working a camera trap for a bear corridor portfolio. New leaves, heavy damp air, whip poor wills going all night like a metronome you stop hearing and then hear enormously. My site was 4 miles up a trail that was closed for the season, which I had a permit for and had mostly to myself, and I mean entirely to myself. The other spring photographers were all down low chasing warblers. My radio was in the car, which was against my own rules, and I regretted it on principle and not, at the time, for any reason. Let me explain the rig, because the rig is the witness here as much as I am. A camera trap is a camera on a tripod that fires itself. Mine triggered off a passive infrared sensor. Anything warm crossing the field sets it off, and it lit the scene with an infrared flash. 850 nanometer. That matters, so I'll say it in plain words. The flash is invisible, not dim, invisible. It's light no mammal eye can see, mine included. When that camera fired at night, the meadow it watched stayed, to every living eye in it, black. A deer standing in the beam sees nothing, which is the whole point. You get the animal being an animal, not an animal staring at a strobe. And I had a ritual, because rituals are how you keep a career and a business run on batteries. At every setup, I measured my flash fall-off with a test card, a gray card on a stick, Walked out from the camera at night while the rig fired. You do it so you know your working depth. At 18 meters, my flash was a whisper. At 20, it was nothing. Gone, past the edge of what the sensor could return. I wrote 20 in the notebook. I always write it in the notebook. It's a number I own, the radius of a circle of invisible light with my camera at its center, and I want you to keep that circle in your head the way I keep it in mine. Camp itself was the small good life of that kind of work. A one-person tent, a stove the size of a soap dish, a one-cup coffee cone balanced on it like a circus act. My bear bag went up over an oak limb every dusk, a throw that took me 9 tries the first night and 2 by the last. The test card in my kit has a coffee stain on it shaped like Ohio, and it's been there since 2003, and I will retire before it does. I had signed the trail register at the junction on the way in, and in the space for comments I'd written, "Great light." I want you to know I meant the weather. For 2 days, that was still all it meant. First morning, I pulled the card and scrolled the night's take over breakfast. 60 frames. Deer, mostly. Silver ghosts with lantern eyes, the way infrared renders them. A raccoon like a small white burglar. And 3 frames spread across the night, with a paired eye shine far out at the frame's soft edge. Dim. Right at the fall-off line, where the flash goes from whisper to nothing. Something shy, I figured, hanging back. Fine. Shy is a portfolio's best friend. Shy comes closer on night 3. Second morning, 11 frames of the eyes. Same dimness, same distance, scattered around different parts of the frame edge, different bearings from the camera. Over coffee, I did the thing that changed the week. I plotted them. I keep a sketch map of every setup, camera position, game trails, drainage. A compass rose I draw badly and annotate. Close enough. I marked the bearing and range of every eye frame, estimating range off the fall-off dimness, which you can do. Dim is distance when you know your light. The marks made an arc, not a scatter. An arc clean as a protractor at 20 meters. Radius 20 centered on my camera. Deer had stood everywhere that night. Near, far, half in, broadside, they'd printed the whole meadow. The eyes existed only on the circle. Only ever on the circle. On a line drawn at the exact outer edge of a light nothing alive should have been able to see, drawn by something that never once, in 11 frames, stood anywhere else. I checked the trigger log that day too, the timestamps, and I found the thing I still don't say out loud very often. My sensor has a retrigger minimum, a lockout, the shortest gap the electronics allow between firings. The iframes were spaced at exactly that interval. Every one, all week, not roughly. Exactly to the second, 11 times, like whatever stood on the circle of my invisible light also knew the clock inside my camera, and stepped into the sensor's field only and precisely as often as the machine could answer. You should understand what that arc means physically, because I had to sit with it, and so should you. Infrared at that wavelength is invisible to deer, to bears, to cats, to owls, to me. It is not almost invisible. There is no eye in that forest that receives it. For something to hold position at the fall-off line of that flash, night after night, bearing after bearing, it has to perceive the flash. Not the camera, the flash. The light itself, the invisible cone of it, and not just perceive it but resolve its edge. The exact radius where whisper becomes nothing, which I could only find with a gray card and a tape measure. Whatever stood on my circle was reading, casually, in the dark, a boundary I needed instruments to know I owned. I gave a full day to the honest explanation, and I wanted on the record that I worked for it. Sensor smudge, a flaw on the chip, a hair in the housing. some artifact that prints phantom highlights at a fixed image radius, which would mimic a fixed distance. I cleaned the sensor. I reshot the test card. I walked the whole arc at noon with a tape measure, 20 meters, all the way around, looking for a game trail, a scrape, anything with feet. Grass and briars, and one very indignant box turtle. The theory held anyway, because I wanted it to the way you hold a warm mug. I photographed warblers all afternoon, ate the good freeze-dried dinner I'd been saving, and the meadow in daylight was only a meadow. Green to its edges, full of birds. Third night, I escalated, because that's what a methodical person does instead of leaving. I had a stronger infrared panel in my kit, a big auxiliary unit for wider fields. I swapped it in at dusk and reshot the test card. 28 meters to nothing with the new panel. I wrote 28 in the notebook. You already know what the first I-frame of that night shows. 28 meters. First frame, first hour. The eyes sitting on the new circle like it had been posted. My light got bigger, and the circle got bigger, and the thing that lived on the circle moved out with it. The same night, the same hour I changed it. There is no smudge that reads a notebook. I should describe frame 61, because it's the only one where the flash caught more than eyes. The one time it stood maybe a half meter inside the line. Infrared renders deer, silver, and raccoons white and everything crisp. Frame 61 shows an outline that fails to finish. Shoulders suggested. A head suggested. And the suggestion abandoned above the eyes, the way a sketch is abandoned. And through it, behind it, the meadow renders almost correctly, just slightly wrong, bent about a degree, like heat shimmer with no heat. A smudge that stands up. That's all I have, and I've decided it's all I want. The deer, I should say, fed inside the circle all week. Every night, frame after frame, heads down, calm, on the lit ground between the camera and the arc, like the inside of that circle was the safest pasture in Tennessee. Maybe it was. I've thought about that more than I've thought about almost anything else in my career. They grazed with their tails to it. The whip poor will sang through every timestamp. Nothing in that meadow but me ever acted like anything was wrong, and I only acted like it at breakfast, with a pencil. Last night I sat out. I want to be honest about why. It wasn't courage, it was jurisdiction. That was my circle. My light, my meter tape, my number in my notebook, and I could not pack out without once being present in person for whatever business was being conducted on its rim. So I put my chair beside the tripod at dusk, wrapped up in my bag, and sat with the cable release in my glove. The camera can be fired by hand that way. One manual frame whenever I chose. I heard nothing all night. I want that plane, and I want the texture of the nothing on the record too, because it wasn't an eerie nothing. It was a working forest at night, doing all its ordinary business, with me in a chair inside it. No steps, no briars dragging, no breath but mine. Whip poor will, barred owl far off, the small rain of dew coming off the leaves at 2 a.m. At 2, by my watch, I pressed the cable release. One manual frame, my frame, of a meadow I could not see. The flash fired, invisible. The shutter clicked, which is the only part a human gets. And 2 seconds later the rig fired again, on its own, triggered by something warm, crossing the sensor's field. I sat very still after that second click, and I am not ashamed to say I did not fire a third. At dawn I pulled the card, my manual frame, 2:01 and some seconds. The meadow, empty, silver grass to the tree line, every meter of it clean, nothing anywhere, and I have never liked a photograph less. The automatic frame, 2 seconds behind it. The eyes. On the circle. At 28 meters. 60 degrees around the arc from where I had been staring the entire time. Both frames perfectly exposed. The camera in perfect working order, before and after, tested, retested, serviced that fall, nothing ever found. It had been 60 degrees around from my manual frame in 2 silent seconds, or it had been there all along, and my frame simply hadn't been offered anything, and I genuinely don't know which of those sentences I believe on a given day. What I know is arithmetic. A quarter of that circle is more than 20 meters of May undergrowth, and the whip poor will did not miss a note. I packed out that morning on schedule, telling myself it was on schedule, and it even was. I still do this work. I'm good at it. I'm careful. My fall-off numbers go in the notebook every setup, and the notebooks go back 16 years now. I told myself back then that if the ark ever plotted again, I'd pack out the same morning, and I've kept the promise empty because it never has. Not once. Whatever stood on my circle in the Smokies stood on it for 5 nights, kept perfectly to a light it should not have seen and a clock it should not have known, and then let me go photograph bears for the rest of my life. The card from that week is in a firebox in my closet. It has never been in a portfolio, a slideshow, a folder anyone else can open. People ask about my best unpublished frame. Photographers ask that at bars, and I say a smudge that stands up, and they laugh, and I let them. Censors smudge, cards corrupt. Turtles are indignant, deer are calm, and 20 meters is 20 meters. I measured it myself. Maybe something out there just likes the edge of things. But then again, maybe the edge is where it's polite to stand, when you can see every light there is. 40 campfires burned down in that loop that night, and something crossed it all night long, without one of them ever touching it. My name's Ned. In August of 1959, I was 38 years old. I managed a hardware store, and I had a wife, 2 kids, a station wagon, and 2 weeks of vacation, one of which we spent every summer at the same campground in the Sierra Nevada, in Loop C, at Site 12, which we got by mailing the reservation card in January like it was a tax document. This was family camping, the good crowded kind. 40-some sites under the pines, kids on bicycles until dusk, the smell of pine duff and dish soap and marshmallows going to carbon. A dog on a chain at Site 9 that barked at everything all weekend, and I do mean everything. Remember the dog? I'm an orderly man. My kids would use a stronger word. Every night of camp, last thing, I did my rounds, and my rounds never varied in 9 summers. Bank the fire, and I banked a fire properly. Ash over coals, ring swept, because as I used to say to my son, you bank a fire so a fool can't wake it. Latch the coolers against the bears, and pair the kids' shoes at the tent flap, toes out, so nobody hunts a sneaker at 2 a.m. during a bathroom emergency. Then, most nights, one last trip to the water spigot at the center of the loop with the canvas water jug, so the morning coffee wouldn't wait on anybody. The spigot at 11:40 at night is a place I wish I could take you. You're at the hub of a wheel of sleeping families. All around the loop, 40 fire rings in 40 states of dying. Some down to a red eye, some still fluttering little flames off a log end. Here and there a lantern going through canvas, an orange glow like a coal wrapped in paper. Station wagons ticking as their engines finish cooling. Somebody's transistor radio murmuring a ball game 2 loops over, then clicking off. And the dark between all of it, the pooled dark under the pines, moving all night as the fires moved, shrinking where a log caught, spreading where one settled. I'd stand there with the jug filling, the handle squeaking the way every camp spigot handle has squeaked since the beginning of the world, and feel like the night watchman of a small sleeping town. And like all watchmen, I figured the town was mine. That night was a Wednesday, mid-trip, the best night of any camp week. The kids had ridden themselves to rags and gone down without protest. My daughter had whittled a marshmallow stick to a point that afternoon and leaned it against our fire ring, sugar black at the tip, and my wife had gone to bed with the crossword half done and the flashlight still on it, and the whole loop had that 11 o'clock settledness. Dishes done, bear boxes clanked shut one last time somewhere, a good tiredness lying over everything like another tent. I did my rounds, fire banked, coolers latched, shoes paired, toes out, and I took the jug and walked to the spigot. And if you'd stopped me on the way and asked me to swear to what was in that loop, I'd have said 40 families, some raccoons, and one loud dog, and I'd have been wrong by at least one. The walker cured me of that. I caught it first as a blink. Filling the jug, looking across the loop at the Henderson's fire, site 20, a good steady bed of coals, and it blinked. Went dark and came back, the way a light does when something passes between you and it. Then site 19's lantern glow did it, then the little flame at 17, in order. Something was crossing the loop, left to right, between me and that row of fires, at an easy walking pace. A camper, obviously, headed to the bathrooms the long way. Except the bathrooms were the other way, and the path it was taking ran through open ground between sites, and here is what my eye kept snagging on and my head kept refusing. I never saw it. Not once, and I was looking. I only ever saw fires blink. Whatever crossed Loop C that night crossed it in the seams, in the pooled dark between one fire's reach and the next, and it was never, not for one step, in the light of any of the 40. You'd think that's nothing. A dark campground, a dark walker, of course you can't see him. But I stood at that spigot most of an hour, jug long full, and I watched, and the thing you have to understand is that the dark in a campground at night is not a fixed thing. It's a map that redraws itself minute by minute. The Henderson's fire settles, and its circle of reach pulls in, and a lane of new dark opens along their side. A log catches at site 5, flares, and a wedge of the loop that was dark for 20 minutes is lit ground again, all at once. I grew up on that arithmetic, and the walker's line bent with the map. Every crossing, and I counted 9 of them, took a different path, and every path threaded whatever dark existed at that minute. It used ground that had been lit 10 minutes before and had gone out. It never used ground that was lit now. It was walking a maze whose walls were made of firelight, and the walls moved, and it never touched one. The dog at site 9 stood up for the 3rd crossing. That dog had barked at bicycles, at raccoons, at the camp host's truck, at a paper bag going across the loop in the afternoon wind, at me, twice, a man it had known for years. It stood, faced the seam of dark where the walker was passing, and tracked it, head turning slow and level, the full width of the loop. And it lay back down, not a sound. Chain never came taut. It watched that thing pass like you'd watch a neighbor you'd nodded to for 30 years, and whatever category that dog filed it under, the filing said no barking, and I have wondered ever since what was written on the folder. Around the 6th crossing, a teenager came out of the tent at Site 14, walked 8 feet from the walker's seam, and stood there against a pine doing what teenage boys do against pines at midnight. Half asleep, oblivious, and shuffled back in. The walker's line that crossing bent gently by exactly enough. Around the boy's little distance the way a stream goes around a stone, and back to the seam and on. I had my comfortable theory, same as everybody in these stories, I suppose. An insomniac camper, courteous about flashlights, doing laps because his back hurt. I nearly called out to him. I had the wave halfway composed, that 2-finger camp wave, and a friendly word about not being able to sleep either. What killed the theory wasn't fear, it was arithmetic. 9 crossings in an hour. No tent ever visited, no bathroom ever reached, no pause, no cigarette, no stopping to look at the stars, which is the entire menu of things sleepless campers do. and the gravel. Loop C's road and every path in it were gravel, the loud kind, the kind that announced the camp host's boots from 60 feet. Under all those pines the duff is quiet, but you cannot cross that loop 9 times without gravel, and the night said, duff, duff, nothing, all night. I never heard the gravel. 40 years, and it's the gravel I come back to. A man can walk quiet on duff. Nothing walks quiet on that gravel. The only way to cross it silent is to know where it is and never step on it. In the dark, at an easy pace, 9 different ways. Then my own fire called me home. I'd banked it, you remember. Banked it to my own standard, ash over coals, a fire a fool couldn't wake. As I came up on our site with the jug, it flared. Sap pocket, deep in a log end, they'll do it, a pop and a gush of flame off pitch, and it went up man-high for a few seconds, roaring soft, throwing my shadow out behind me and remapping every foot of dark in that corner of the loop. Ground that had been black since 10 o'clock went orange in a breath. The seams all moved, and the walker was already in the new dark. I saw the blink, 1 heartbeat after the flare, the Henderson's coals going dark and coming back over where the new seam now ran, 15 feet from where the old one had. It had not crossed the newly lit ground. I was standing at the edge of it, facing it, lit up like a man on a stage, and nothing crossed it. It was simply already where the dark now was, as if it had the new map before the light finished drawing it. As if, when the walls of the maze move, whatever walks the maze moves with them, in the same stroke, the way your reflection doesn't cross the room when you tilt the mirror. The flare settled. I stood by my own fire ring with a full water jug and the good smell of pine wood and pitch, and everything in Loop C was ordinary. My kids' shoes were paired at the flap, toes out. My wife's crossword lay on the picnic table under the flashlight. The dog, at Site 9, was asleep. I went in, and I lay listening to a campground breathe, and to gravel that never once made a sound. And somewhere well before dawn, the fires all finished dying, and the whole map went dark, and I slept too. What was there to stay up for? By then, I understood the walker's rule, as well as I understood my own. It would be in the dark. All the dark was its side of the line now, and my side was a tent with 4 people breathing in it, and the line, whatever else it was apparently good. Dew tells the truth in the morning, same as frost. I was up first, always am, and I walked the loop with my coffee before the first zipper went. Dew on every table, every hood, every tent fly in Loop C, silver, even, honest. Except one lane. A winding lane, a man wide, where the duff was dry. It came in from the trees by Site 3, wandered the loop in curves that made no sense at 7 in the morning, and went out by the spigot. I stood at bends in it and worked out what the curves had gone around, and they'd gone around light. Every curve. I'd spent the night learning the map, and the lane observed the map, hour by hour. It crossed ground the Hendersons' fire had owned at 10, only where the fire had lost it by 12. It was a walking record of where the dark had been, written in dry, and it never crossed the gravel at all. It stepped over. There were gaps in the lane at every path, clean gaps, exactly a road's width, and dew unbroken on the gravel inside them. I told nobody over pancakes. You don't. It's a family campground. We camped that loop the rest of my kids' childhoods, and my grandkids have camped it, and it's a good place, I want that said. Nothing was ever taken, nothing was ever harmed, no camper ever woke. Whatever walked Loop C wanted the dark between us, and only that, and got it, and left the dew to tell one man who happened to be at the spigot. But I drown my fire now. Bank it, then drown it, stir it, drown it again. Stone cold every trip since, and when my son teases me, big fire safety Ned, I tell him a fire out keeps its shape all night. Meaning, a dead fire's dark doesn't move. Meaning, if the walls of the maze hold still, then whatever walks it has no reason to come rearrange the seams by your sight. He thinks it's a proverb about caution. Let him. It was probably a quiet hiker with strange habits and a good memory for gravel. Probably. I never heard the gravel, though. 40 years. It's always the gravel. The summer I was 19, I logged the wind every hour, all night, in a book. And something out on the lake logged my light. My name's Margie. In July of 1972, I was a junior counselor at a girls' camp on a lake in northern Wisconsin. And I had the waterfront rotation, which was the trusted job. And I knew it. And I was proud of it in that complete way you can only be proud at 19. Waterfront duty ran 11 at night to 2 in the morning, alone on the swim dock. You sat by the dock light and you kept the waterfront book. Every hour, on the hour, wind, water condition, air temperature, remarks. In between, you watched the lake, checked that the buoy line held its curve, and listened for anything that wasn't supposed to be in the water, which in 11 summers of that camp's records had amounted to 2 deer and 1 canoe that had untied itself. The dock light was kerosene, on a post at the end of the dock, an old railroad-style lantern the camp was vain about. It burned all night every night, and it did the thing a fixed light on a lake does, which is the reason I have a story. It laid a lane on the water, a reflection lane running out from the dock toward the far shore, a wobbling ribbon of lit water. And that lane has rules. I didn't invent them, the lake teaches them to anyone who sits there long enough. On a dead calm night, the lane runs long, way out, a road of light. When there's chop, the lane breaks up and shortens to a stub. The lane's length is a reading. By mid-July, I could look at the lane and write the wind line of the book before I felt the wind on my face, and the book and my face never disagreed. Mrs. Aldous, the director, taught me the standard for the remarks column my first night. Write only what you'd defend to me at breakfast. I wrote that way all summer. It's why I trust what's in the book, and it's why one line of it still bothers me. I loved that duty before and, oddly, after. You'd come down the hill in your sweater, which smelled of wood smoke and bug dope by the second week and never stopped, and the dockboards would still be letting go of the day's heat, damp and giving under bare feet. Kerosene carries over water farther than sound, I swear. You smelled the light before you saw it. The boys' camp across the lake played taps at 10, badly, a different boy every night, and the last note always fell off the end like a canoe tipping. Moths worked the dock light in their doomed little orbit, and fish rose to the fallen ones, but only inside the lit circle, which I thought about later more than I liked. The buoy line's floats knocked together once whenever a swell passed. 1 knock apiece, polite. The diving raft's barrels boomed soft when the water changed its mind. Some nights a flashlight blinked down the hill from Cabin 7, a camper's midnight bathroom run, and went back up, and that was the whole of the traffic. 3 hours of that, and the book, and the lane. I'd have told you I knew everything that lake did at night. I knew almost everything. The something showed up the second week of July. Midnight, moderate chop, lane running maybe 30 yards. At the end of the lane, right where the lit water gave out, a low, dark shape, barely off the water. A deadhead, obviously, a waterlogged log riding low, and the lake was full of them, and I noted nothing, because you don't log a log. At the 1 o'clock entry, the wind had come up. The lane had shortened by half, 15 yards of lit water, and the shape was at 15 yards. At the end of the lane. Still. Again. I remember doing the geometry slowly, tired girl slow, cold hands slow. Logs drift downwind. The wind that night quartered across the lake from the northwest, which would have carried a log along the shore, sideways to me. This had come straight in, toward the dock 15 yards, and stopped exactly where the light's reach had shrunk to, as though it hadn't moved toward me at all. As though it had moved with the lane. The way the lane's end had moved, which is not a direction anything floats. It kept the boundary. The boundary had come in, so it had come in. I sat there working on how a log does that, and the honest answer was that a log does not, and I got up and checked that my whistle was on its cord, which tells you where my head was going, and then I did the responsible thing, which was to stop looking at it. A counselor who stares at one spot of lake all shift logs nothing. Discipline held for most of an hour. Discipline works that way. Almost. The wind died back near 2. The chop laid down, the lane lengthened, rolling itself back out across the water like a bolt of cloth, and the shape went out with it. I watched that part straight on. It receded as the lane grew, smoothly, at the lane's own speed, no wake. Nothing swims without a wake. A loon was sitting the water off the buoy line, between the dock and the shape the whole time, and it never lifted, never called, never turned. It rode there like it was alone on that lake. The barred owl went off in the pines behind the cabins, its regular hour, its regular call. Everything in the night kept its schedule, is what I'm telling you. Every living thing behaved, and the only rule breaker out there was obeying a rule nothing alive has ever been asked to keep. I wrote, at the 1 a.m. line, calm returning, and in remarks, deadhead off S-buoy, ? At the 2 o'clock line, end of my shift, I started to write a word in remarks and got 4 letters in, O, B, J, E, and stopped, and crossed it out. I could hear Mrs. Aldous at breakfast asking me to defend object, and I could not defend object. And I wrote nothing after the crossing out, and the crossing out is still there. That book went in the camp trunk every fall. I've seen it since, which I'll get to. You want to know what 3 hours alone with that is like? At 19, it's not screaming. Nobody screams at a lake. It's a very long conversation with yourself about the word probably. Probably a log. Probably an eddy. You hold the word up and it does its work for 20 minutes, and then the lane shortens 1 more yard, in 1 more breath of wind, and the dark spot is 1 more yard nearer within the minute, and the word needs holding up again, and it gets heavier every time. I sang campgrounds under my breath, is what I actually did, songs with counting in them, and I kept the book, on the hour, every hour, in handwriting I'm still proud of, because the book was the deal I had with the night. I write down what's true, and in exchange, what's true holds still until morning. It was there my next 3 duty nights, and not on the nights between. I know because I asked the other waterfront girls, carefully, in the way you fish without seeming to. Anything on the lake last night, nothing but mosquitoes. It came on my nights. I've never known what to do with that, and I still don't, so I'll just leave it with you. The night I actually want to tell you about was the last one, the glass night. Late July and around 3, which was past my shift, but the girl relieving me had a fever, and I'd taken her hours. The wind quit entirely. Not died down, quit. The lake went to black glass, the kind of calm where the shore pines stand upside down in the water and the stars lie around in it, and the lane from the dock light rolled out and out and out, longer than I'd ever logged it. A road of lit water, 40 yards, 50, more, running from the foot of my dock across a lake that had stopped breathing. And at the very tip of it, exactly at the tip, it was there, not near the tip, at it. The lane ran out to the last stitch of light on the last catch of water, and where the light stopped early, the stopping early had a width, and the width was it. That's the closest I can come to describing what it ever looked like. A place where the lit road ended before the light did. 5 missing yards with a shape to them. We stayed like that a long time, the lane and the 2 of us at either end of it. The loon asleep with its head under its wing somewhere off the buoys. A road of light between us. Perfectly empty, perfectly still, and neither of us used it. It didn't come down the lane, not by a yard, not in an hour. The lane was mine, and the far end of the lane was, apparently, its, and the whole length of that bright road lay on the water like a thing neither party would touch, out of what I can only ever call politeness. And I know how that sounds about a lake at 3 in the morning. At 3:40, a cat's paw of breeze came from nowhere, one line of chop, a single dark wrinkle that ran down the lane like a finger drawn along it. The lane shortened. 5 yards of light let go of the water. And it was gone into exactly those 5 yards, and the breeze passed, and the lane rolled back out to its full length, and the tip of it lit plain, empty water all the way, and that was the end. It never came back, that night or any night after, mine or anyone's. Now, the part I go back and forth about. The camp had an anemometer on the lodge flagpole up the hill, and the nature counselor kept an hourly wind log for her weather badge girls. That whole summer, same hours as mine. Years later, at a reunion, a bunch of us middle-aged campers got into the trunk with the old books, laughing, reading our own handwriting. I put my book and the lodge log side by side, that July, my nights. Hour by hour they agree, mine in the hills, all month, wind for wind. And I felt proud all over again, 40 years on. Except the glass night. My 3 a.m. line says calm, flat calm, lane full length. The lodge log for that hour records the night's only gust, 11 miles an hour, at 3:05. 11 miles an hour is not a subtlety. 11 miles an hour on that lake ends a reflection lane, wipes it to a stub, and I was staring down the full length of that lane at 3:05, at what stood at the end of it, on water that never moved. Whatever wind crossed the hill that minute, the lake sat it out, or was excused from it. The books don't argue with each other anywhere else, all summer, just there. Just at the 1 hour I could have used a witness. I'm in my 70s now. My granddaughters go to that same camp, 3rd generation, and they do waterfront duty. And I've never once told them this story. And I suppose this is me telling them now, if this kind of thing reaches them where they are, which I doubt. The lake house we have on a different lake has a dock light on a timer. My husband installed it years ago and it clicks on at dusk and off at midnight. And I have never in all these years sat out its whole cycle, and I swim in the mornings, in the plainest light there is. It was a deadhead riding an eddy, most likely, and a tired girl's geometry, and a gust that missed the water, and a loon that had seen it all before. Most likely, but I kept that book the way I was taught, only what I'd defend at breakfast, and the book was never wrong all summer. I'll say that as long as I live. The book was never wrong, and the book says the lane ran full at 3, and something at the end of it kept the light's edge like the light's edge was a dock of its own. Maybe the lake just does that once in a girl's life, but then again, maybe some things wait at the end of whatever road we lay down, and the manners are in never walking it. There were 2 amber eyes over the black water that June, 9 feet up where nothing stood, and they kept my torchlight's reach for a solid mile. My name's Harmon. In June of 1948, I was 29, working at a sawmill on the north edge of the Okefenokee in Georgia, and my cousin Ferd and I kept a fishing camp back in the swamp. A plank cabin on a piling island you got to by John boat and nothing else. We fished bream at night in the warm months, the old way, by torchlight. You burned fat lighter, what some call fatwood, heart pine full of resin, in an iron basket up on the bow. It throws a hard orange light and it pops and spits, and every camp down there had a sack of splits by the door the way a kitchen has kindling. That week, Ferd had a fever, some summer thing, sweated it out in 2 days, but it meant I pulled the run alone that night, which I'd done plenty and thought nothing of. You should understand what alone means back in there. Once you're past the first bend, the cabin lamp is gone, and there's no light of any human kind for more miles than you'd care to pull. The swamp at night is loud. I want to say that early, because people think it's silent and it's the opposite. Frogs in their thousands, gators grunting somewhere off in the prairie grass, owls trading calls across the channel, bugs in one steady sheet of sound. It's a going concern, the swamp at night. Nothing about it waits on you. My grandfather taught me the water down there, and he taught me the eyes. You pole at night in Torchlight, and the dark gives you back eyes, all along the banks and the water, and every kind rides its own shelf. That was his word. Gator eyes sit right at the water line, a red-orange pair, about a hand's width apart, and they lie flat on the black water like coals. Coon eyes ride bank high, greenish, busy, they bounce. Deer stand back at the tree line, high and wide and still. Owl eyes come and go in the branches. The swamp at night is eyes, he'd say, and every kind has its shelf, and when you know the shelves, you're never lost about what's around you. He had me count pairs out loud as a boy, polling. Gator, gator, coon, gator, deer. I still count out loud when I'm alone, or I did, up until the night I'm telling you about, and then again every night after, only louder. I lit off from the cabin about 10 with a full sack of splits. Ferd's fever breathing steady behind me in the bunk, the lamp in the window going small around the first bend. The torch was throwing good, a circle of orange maybe 60 feet all around, riding along with the boat the way Torchlight does. That's the thing about a bow torch, and it's the whole story, so let me set it down plain. The light travels with you. You are the center of a lit room that goes where you go, and the walls of the room are dark, and the walls keep your pace exactly, because they're yours. 60 feet of seeing, moving down the channel at poling speed and the swamp opening into it ahead and closing out of it behind all night. I was 2 bends in, counting eyes by habit. Gator at the grass edge, pair of coons working a log, gator, gator, and then a pair on the wrong shelf. Amber, steady and high. 9 feet off the water, I'd have said. And I'm a fair judge. A man who stacks lumber judges 9 feet all day long. 9 feet is a shelf. Deer at the tree line can sit that high on a bank, but these were not at the tree line. These were out over the open channel ahead of me, over water, where there is no bank, no snag, no cypress, nothing to stand on at any height at all. And they sat exactly at the rim of my torchlight, right at the 60-foot wall where the orange gives out, not inside it, at it. I stopped the pole and let the boat glide, and the eyes held their shelf and their distance while my lit room slid forward around me, which meant, and I worked this out slower than you just heard it, that they were moving. Backing away down the channel ahead of me, at exactly my speed, keeping exactly the rim. A mark on the rim of a wheel, riding as the wheel rolled. I'll tell you what I did because it's what any swamp man would do. I kept fishing. I know how that sounds. But the bream were biting, tapping the line like a code, and fear comes on slow in a loud swamp. It has to talk over the frogs. I poled from hole to hole, a 1/4 mile of channel, and the eyes kept the rim the whole way, ahead of me when I moved, holding when I held, and every true eye in the swamp behaved all around them. Gators lay their coals on the water. Coons bounced along the banks. A bull gator's slow wake came up the channel and crossed under the high pair, straight under, indifferent as a log, and the eyes let it pass beneath them the way a lamp lets traffic pass. That was the detail that started to work on me. Not the height, the under. Every eye on that water doubles. It's the first thing Torchlight teaches you. A gator's eyes lie on the water, and the water gives them right back. A second pair upside down, and even a deer's eyes at the tree line will lay a smear on a still channel. Everything on that water casts down. The high pair cast nothing. Amber over black, and the black under them clean. Whatever they belonged to, the swamp's water declined to know about it. Then the torch popped. Fat lighter does that. A resin pocket goes and the flame gushes up man-high for a second or two, and the whole lit room jumps its walls outward, 20, 30 feet of new seeing all around. Two things happened in that gush, both of them in the same half-breath. Every low eye in the new ground blinked out, gators sliding under at the flare, which they always do, which is the swamp behaving. And the high pair didn't blink. It was farther. Instantly. Out at the new rim, the bigger rim, sitting at the fresh edge of the fresh light with no travel in between. The old ground where it had been hung in plain bright orange, empty. There is no between for this thing, I remember thinking, in about those words. It does not cross ground, it has an arrangement with the edge, and the edge does the moving. I had my comfortable answer for a while, same as anybody. Moss shine. Dew on a hank of Spanish moss will throw torchlight back at you, Amber, and there's dead cypress all through there wearing beards of it. On the next bend I found a true snag with true moss, and it gleamed pale just so. And I said out loud, there, you see, and the saying out loud helped, and the snag was real, and I pulled past it and its gleam swung and died the way a reflection does. The high pair, all this time, hung at my rim, and did not swing, and did not die. The snag was real. The eyes were never on it. What I did next I've never fully explained to myself. I quit poling. Middle of a wide stretch, deep of the night, and I shipped the pole and sat down on the thwart and let the boat drift dead, and I let the torch burn down, didn't feed it. The room of light closed in around me, foot by foot, as the flame ate down the last split, 60 feet, 50, the frogs roaring on, the bream still tapping some other man's bait somewhere. And the eyes came in with the walls, foot by foot, slow as the flame died, at the rim the whole way, 40 feet by the end, close enough that I could see the spacing of them plain, and the spacing was wrong. Wide. Wide as my two thumbs held out together at arm's length, which is no shelf my grandfather ever taught me. Not gator, not deer, not owl, not any eyes that ride 9 feet over open water coming down a dying light, like the light was a rope being paid out. My hand found the split sack by feel. I'll be honest, at 40 feet, in that spacing my hand had been in the sack a while. I fed the torch 3 splits, and the resin caught and the flare went up over my head, and the room threw its walls back out to 90 feet all in one gush. And the eyes were at 90. Between one pop of the fire and the next, 50 feet of open channel. Water I never once took my eyes off. Orange and bright and empty the whole flare long, and never crossed. Out at the new rim, at their shelf, at their spacing, steady as ever, patient as the light itself. I have thought about that half-second for 70 years, and I will tell you the truest thing I know about it. Nothing went away from me in that half-second. The room got bigger, and the far side of the room stayed the far side of the room. That's all that ever happened all night. Nothing ever came to me. I had a wall, and something that was of the wall, and the wall was mine. And it minded my wall better than I minded it. I pulled home at a working pace. Not a running pace, a working one. I've always been plain about that, and I counted every eye on every shelf out loud the whole way. Gator, gator, coon, gator, and every one of them was where it ought to be, and the high pair kept my rim to the last bend. When the cabin lamp came around the cypress, yellow as butter in the window, the eyes were gone. Not backed off. Gone, between my looking and my looking, the way they'd always moved, without any between. Ferd's breathing hadn't changed. The swamp roared on. I sat on the dock a while with the torch hissing down, and then I went in and lay listening to a fever's sleep and a million frogs, and near dawn I got up and raked out the torch basket, because a man wants his hands doing plain work at an hour like that. The night's clinker was in there, and the stub of my last split, the unburned end of it. And the char on that stub stopped in a line, a clean ring around the wood, straight as a lathe mark, char black on one side, raw fat pine on the other. I've burned fat lighter my whole life. Char wanders. Char follows the grain and the resin. It feathers. It licks. It does not take a line. That stub burned exactly as far as something allowed, and then it was done burning, and the mark of where the allowing stopped is on it to this day. I kept it. It's in my tackle box now, in with the worn-out bits, dented tin, and old corks and leader wire, where a thing can be kept without being displayed. I fished that run the rest of my life, and fish it yet when my knees let me, in daylight. I showed the stub to my boy the summer he turned 16 and was starting to take the John boat out alone. Didn't make a sermon of it. Told him what I've told you, shorter, and put it back in the box, and he looked at me a while and said, "All right, Daddy," and we have not needed to mention it since. He doesn't night fish either, I notice. Moss throws light back. Owls sit, snags a tired man can't see. Swamp gas does whatever the fellow at the feed store needs it to have done. A man can hand you 10 explanations, and I've tried on all 10, and some of them fit everything but the spacing, and some fit everything but the ring on the stub, and not one of them fits the 90 feet. I counted eyes for a living mile that night, and every kind was on its shelf, and I'm an old man still looking for the shelf that Pear sat on. Maybe my grandfather knew it and left it out of the lesson to let me sleep. But then again, maybe some shelves you only get shown once, at the far side of your own light, and the kindness is that they stay there. For 3 nights running, something came up from the shore to the edge of a light I had already blown out. My name's Eula. I'm 66 in this story, which happens in September of 1996, and I'd been 66 for exactly 1 week of it. I was postmaster of a small town in the Adirondacks for 31 years, retired by then, widowed a while by then too, and every September I took the same 2 weeks at the same campsite on the same lake, Site 4, the one out on the Little Point. 20 Septembers by that year. The camp season's over by Labor Day up there, the other sites go empty, and the caretaker plows through on Tuesdays to see that the pump works and that I'm alive, and waves 2 fingers off the wheel, and that's the population. People ask if it's lonely. It's the 2 weeks a year I'm least lonely, is what it is. But you have to have sorted mail through 4 decades of winters to understand that, maybe? I'm an orderly woman. Postmasters are. I square things to table edges without noticing I've done it. And I have my rituals out there, and the one that matters to this story is the lantern one. I run a little candle lantern on the table after supper, a tin and glass thing with a real flame in it, enough light to read by and see the kettle. And when I'm done with the evening, I blow it out and then I sit. Because here's a thing about eyes that town people forget. When your light goes out, you're blind, truly blind, for a while, and then the night hands you back the world a piece at a time. At my site, the pieces come in an order. Across the lake on the far shore stand 3 white pines above everything else, and as my eyes come back, the tallest one stands out of the dark first. Then the leaning one, the one the ice storm bent in '87, the caretaker tells me. Then the small one. Tallest, leaning, small. 4 minutes, more or less, to all 3. I've done it 1,000 nights. It's the closest thing I have to a prayer, and I'd thank you not to tell my minister that. One more piece of furniture. Years ago, I paced off the little circle my lantern throws to set my clothesline stake where towels would stay findable, and I drove the stake just inside the light's edge. The stake's been there, driven and redriven, for 15 years. I know exactly where my light ends. It ends just past my stake. Remember the stake? The first night of the second week, I blew out the lantern and sat, waiting on my pines. And in the blind minutes, the steps came. Up from the shore, on the duff, soft. Deer soft, I'd have said, except for the spacing of them, which was 2-footed. I know deer, they're half the traffic on that point. 4 feet coming down make a pattering, a shuffle to it. This was step and step and step, unhurried, 1 weight, 2 feet, coming up from the water line toward my table. And stopping, at a certain distance, not close. I sat with my blind eyes open, listening, not frightened. I want that plane. I was mostly annoyed at the timing, and the steps stood where they'd stopped and made no more of themselves. And then the tallest pine stood up out of the dark across the lake, and the leaning one, and the small one, and the sight came back to me piece by piece, table, birch trunk, the pale line of the shore. Nothing. Shore empty, duff empty, night ordinary. Whatever had walked up was not there, and by the feel of the night had not been there for some little while, as though it had ended when my blindness did. Dear, I said to the kettle, and went to bed. The second night it happened the same. Lantern out, blind minutes, the steps up from the shore, the stop. And lying back in my chair with my eyes shut, waiting on my pines, I worked on the distance the way you'd worry a knot, the stopping place. It was familiar in my legs before it was anywhere else. Then I had it. 12 paces, maybe 13. It was the stake. It was the edge of the lantern's little circle, the line I'd paced off 15 years ago. The steps came up from the shore each night and stopped at the rim of the light. And the light was out. Had been out 2 full minutes. There was no circle, no edge, no anything. Only a cold tin lantern and a blind old woman. And the rim was being kept anyway. Whatever came up, the duff was honoring the boundary of a light that wasn't burning, at the exact radius where the light would have ended if I'd left it lit. It knew where my edge was, is the plainest way to say it. It knew where my light ended when my light wasn't there, the way I know where the sorting rack's pigeonholes are with the post office dark. Old knowledge, practiced. I lay there with that thought, and I examined myself for fear, honestly, the way you'd check yourself for ticks, and I didn't find any. I found something more like the feeling when a stranger holds the door and stands well back while you pass. Manners. I was being shown the manners of something, and the manners were old-fashioned and complete, and my heart, which had earned the right to gallop, didn't. The third night I ran the only test I was willing to run. I blew the lantern out an hour early. First dark, supper barely cleared, a whole hour before my usual sitting time. If it was deer on a habit, deer keep their own schedule and the shore would stay quiet until the regular hour. I sat and went blind and waited on my pines. The steps came an hour early. They came, when the light went out. Not by the clock, by me. Up from the shore, soft, 2-footed, to the rim, my rim, 12 paces, and stopped. And waited. That's the word for what the quality of it was. Not the waiting of a thing that wants in. The waiting of a neighbor at a gate that wasn't even there anymore. Being honored anyway, because between the two of us we'd agreed on where it stood over the years, without ever once meeting about it. And I did the boldest thing I've done in my life, which will make you laugh because it was nothing. I stayed exactly as I was, eyes shut, hands folded, and I said something. Not out loud, into the ritual, the way the pines are a prayer. I said, the stake is inside the line, and the line is yours, and I am inside the line, and we have both known that for years. That's all. The steps stood at the rim for the length of one more long lake breath, one of those swells that comes from nothing and lays itself along the shore. And then the duff gave them back the way it had brought them, shoreward, unhurried, quieter, quiet, gone. And the tallest pine stood up out of the dark, then the leaning one, then the small one. In the morning, my clothesline stake was leaned. An inch out of true, tipped outward, away from the sight, toward the shore, like something had rested the smallest possible weight on the far side of it. Once, politely, in passing. The ground around it wasn't marked at all. I tapped it straight with the flat of my hatchet, one tap, and hung my towels. And that was the whole of the evidence and the whole of the harm, 1 inch of lean in a cedar stake, and I've been offered worse by frost every single spring. That was 17 years ago now, near enough. I still take my 2 weeks. The caretaker still comes Tuesdays, older than me now, which we joke about, and I blow my lantern out early every night I'm there, first dark, on purpose. Because I came to understand it that third morning, hanging towels, and I've had no reason since to understand it differently. The dark out there isn't empty, and it isn't waiting, and it isn't mine. It comes on shift when my light goes off, that's all, the way I came on at the post office when the nightman hung up his keys. A shift change. The day's boundary handed over, at the old rim, which is kept, whether the lamp burns or not, by whatever keeps it. Maybe it was deer all 3 nights. Deer walk soft, and September deer are curious, and a stake can lean from frost alone. Everybody knows that. Maybe not one thing I've told you needs a single strange word in it. But then again, maybe not. I sit there now, evenings, eyes shut, blind as a stone and easy as one too, and the steps don't come anymore, or come too soft for an old woman's ears, which would be like them. The tallest pine stands up out of the dark, then the leaning one, then the small one. The lake puts its small waves on the shore, and puts them, and puts them. The canvas breathes. And somewhere between the second pine and the third, most nights I'm asleep. Inside my line, with the night keeping its side of everything.